Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the Commerce Connect Introduction and Understanding video series. In this video, we'll be covering the differences between customers and users in Sitecore Commerce Connect. So, some of the key concepts and what we're going to explore in detail is the difference between a commerce customer, a commerce user, and we'll also cover XDB contacts and how those are related within Commerce Connect. So first off, we're going to cover the commerce user. And the primary characteristic of a commerce user are scenarios where you need to have authentication. And so that is really where your solution has users logging in and potentially to see their order history and things like that. Via pipelines, commerce users extend Sitecore user functionality to be able to add the ability to see what web shops that user has the ability to log into. And if you take a look at the pipelines, it also has tie-ins to goals created, often for automation states. And you can see that it's tied into the creation of a Sitecore user as well. Now, for many operations, you also need to have a commerce customer associated for these operations. And you can see once we take a look at customers in B2B scenarios, why there is that relationship between users and customers rather than all having it as a single property. Next, we have a commerce customer. And this makes sense if we think about this in a B2C scenario. And the primary characteristics of a commerce customer are supporting all the non-authentication aspects of interactions. So that is orders, payment, and history. And this will also, through pipelines, this can also create a user in the external e-commerce system. And it does so in our NOP commerce examples. Now, again, why do we have separate commerce customers and commerce users? Well, I'm sure you've had the experience of going to an e-commerce site and buying a product without necessarily creating a user account. So you're buying a product as a guest. That's the type of functionality that is enabled by simply solely having a commerce customer and not a commerce user as well associated with it. Now, one note about commerce customers: to do any out-of-the-box personalization, these often work solely off of commerce and Sitecore users. So there are two ways around that. You either invoke personalization by having a user log in, or for commerce customers who are not logged in and don't have an associated commerce user, you can write customized rules to effectively augment or replace those out-of-the-box rules which do require a commerce user. Now, that relationship between commerce customers and commerce users can actually get much more complex. And in the case of B2B scenarios, this is really where you have a commerce customer essentially representing a company, and the commerce users represent users within that company. So looking here at the entity model for customers and users, you can see those relationships. And in this case here, the customer, again in this B2B scenario being a company, you can see that you have customer parties and various and the ability to support various complex aspects like accounting and buying and various users within that company. So the relationship between commerce customers and commerce users can support simple B2C characteristics, so managing those ordering relationships and managing authentication, but also complex B2C relationships as well. So last we'll talk about XDB contacts. Now, a commerce customer does exist within XDB, but we've outlined this separately really to cover off the anonymous user case. And so this is the case where you may have information about a user and they're not a commerce customer and they're not a commerce user, but they are navigating on your website anonymously, and you can do certain things with that user around understanding who they are from their session, and also even placing them in an automation state. But that's really specifically around anonymous users. Now, of course, even if you are authenticated, a lot of that information is stored in XDB for all these other cases. So, for example, if you are doing page visits or page events, engagement automation plans, all of that information is also stored alongside your XDB contact. And so really there are essentially three ways and repositories for user information. There's Commerce User, and that's really using the .NET membership provider. There's Commerce Customers, and that is a specific customer and also stored in XDB, specifically under that API. And then there's also XDB contacts, which can be anonymous or just regular information that is captured for analytics use later on. So let's now take a look at the back end. So once again, I'm here on my Sitecore site and I'm looking at showconfig.aspx, and I'm looking here at the pipelines for the create user process. Now, first off, we have this pipeline of create user and external system. Again, this is a placeholder pipeline. What's really going on here is we're calling our not commerce connector pipeline to create that user, and in this case it's creating that user in the external system. It is also calling that pipeline to create the user in Sitecore, and it's really matching those two users based upon the domain and the username. That's effectively where it's doing the match. It's also creating that contact in XDB, and it's also triggering a user goal. So you can have a goal triggered to do engagement automation or various personalization after the fact. So from that perspective, we can go look at Sitecore here and walk through various operations. So first off, I'm an anonymous visitor here. I can be browsing and I can be adding various components. So I have one product there in the shopping cart, and let's pick this camera. I now have two products within the shopping cart. So if I now look to XDB, and after a bit of a session interval, that cart information will be committed to these automation states. So we'll take a look at that. So I'm here in XDB, and I've waited a couple minutes in order for the automation state to process various transitions. So as you're adding carts, it's adding basically small stub entries to XDB. So I've added product 1, I've added product 2. And what happens is there's a bit of a cleanup process that then aggregates those into a single automation state. And so you can see here at this point, I have my two products added to that shopping cart in the automation state. And that's, we've seen that before, but that's really not what I want to point out. What I want to point out here is this user ID and the fact that this is a GUID. It's basically an anonymous user. If I was logging in and I had carts in this automation state and it's actually a known user, so we have a commerce user as well, you will see that user ID here. And so this is where we know, okay, we're tracking these anonymous users, and that shopping cart information is stored in that automation state. So that's really the first point. We have these XDB contacts that are created, and the reason why XDB contacts are created for anonymous users is not just for automation states and storing those values and tracking that, but that's one of the big reasons. Okay, so now that we know how XDB contacts are used for those anonymous examples, let's go through the case of actually creating a commerce user to reflect this. So once again, I'm going to load up my Sitecore site. And I'm going to register. And I'm going to create a fake user called Jim, and say register. And so for this create user process, there's a number of things going on. He's running through this pipeline. Now, we've got some product information in there, and that's actually from the shopping cart process. It's basically taking that and saying, oh yeah, this user from with this session before visited, he's now registered. Okay, let's grab that card information to persist that. But again, that's really not what we care about. What we care about is this pipeline process. And so first of all, we're kicking off that pipeline, create user and external system. So if I now go to Not Commerce and I take a look at the customers, I'm going to take a look at guests and say search, and you can see here now that I have this newly created guest under the domain commerce users Jim and the company name Starter Kit. This is really a bit of a kludge in the implementation, in that one of the things that commerce users somewhat expect is that you have a web shop as part of that user property. And the reason is that you can have multiple web shops within a Sitecore installation, and so it's expected to be able to store that web shop information somewhere. So if one user registered on site A and site B, you need to have two distinct accounts. In the case of Not Commerce, they didn't really have a place for storing web shop information, and so instead we've reused company name as a place to store that web shop information. And then of course we have the commerce user there in the e-commerce system. So now if I take a look at Sitecore on the Sitecore side, you will see that Jim account was also created on the Sitecore side as well. And that's really what is necessary for the creation of the Sitecore user. So you can see here, or sorry, the commerce user. You can see here that that Jim account was created. Now, of course, we're also creating a commerce customer at the same time, so that if Jim was to actually purchase something, it would be using that customer information in order to actually complete the order and do the order history. And so those are really the two parts there. And really you can see those pipeline operations of creating the external user in the external system, but also creating a user in Sitecore as well to have that commerce user.